He signed the papers with a smirk. 7 years. 7 years of Evelyn Marlowe cooking his meals, ironing his shirts, sitting in silence at the edge of his world. And Grant Holloway couldn't even look up from his desk when he handed her the divorce documents. He slid them across the mahogany like a receipt he no longer needed. When she reached for the pen, he leaned back in his leather chair, arms crossed, and said it with the kind of certainty men use when they've already forgotten someone is still in the room. You were never the woman I needed. No rage, no regret, just words. Casual, clean, meant to cut. And here's the question that will stay with you long after this story ends. If someone spent 7 years treating you like furniture and you finally walked out the door, where would you go? Who would you become? Evelyn signed the papers. She picked up her suitcase. She walked into the rain. She didn't look back. If this story already has you gripping the edge of your seat, you're exactly where we want you. Subscribe to the channel and follow every part of Evelyn's story to the very end, because what happens next will shake you. Hit that like button and drop a comment below telling us the city or country where you're watching from. We want to see just how far this story has traveled. The rain came down the way it always did in Caldwell Harbor. Sideways, cold, indifferent. It hit the pavement outside Grant Holloway's office building at 7:43 in the evening, and it soaked through Evelyn's coat before she reached the bottom step. She had one suitcase, a black rolling bag she'd owned since before she married him, back when she still believed her life was going to be something she chose. She didn't call a cab. She walked. The building behind her was 42 stories of glass and steel that Grant had spent the better part of a decade building into one of the most recognized commercial development firms on the eastern seaboard. The lobby was warm through the windows. She could see the gold lettering on the reception desk from the sidewalk, Holloway Group, and she felt nothing when she looked at it. Not bitterness, not relief, just the strange, hollow weightlessness of a woman who had been invisible for so long she wasn't certain anyone would notice she was gone. She had nowhere specific to go. She knew that walking away from the building. She knew it when she wheeled her suitcase through a puddle outside the parking garage and kept moving anyway. She'd lived inside Grant's orbit so completely that her own edges had gone soft. His friends were her contacts. His calendar was her schedule. His address was the only address she'd known for 7 years. Evelyn Marlowe was 41 years old, and she had just become a woman with nowhere to be. She found a diner 6 blocks from the office. One of those places that exists in every city but belongs nowhere. Fluorescent lights, cracked vinyl booths, a laminated menu held together with tape. She sat in the back with her suitcase against the wall and ordered coffee. She didn't drink and stared at the tabletop for a long time. The waitress left her alone. That at least was something. She'd met Grant at a charity dinner 11 years ago. She had been working in contract law then. Small firm, steady work, nothing glamorous. He had charmed her the way certain men charm women, completely, efficiently, and with the specific focus of someone who wants something and is good at getting it. She hadn't seen it that way at the time. At the time, she had believed she was being loved. The first year of their marriage, she still worked. Second year, she started working less. By the third year, Grant had made it clear, not cruelly, never directly, that her presence at home served the household better than her presence at an office. There were dinners to host. There were his colleagues' wives to coordinate with. There were appearances to maintain. And Evelyn, who had never been a woman who needed applause, told herself it was a reasonable arrangement and kept telling herself that until she stopped examining it at all. She became good at the quiet life. She became, in fact, exceptional at it. She managed their household with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to contracts. She tracked every vendor, every service agreement, every maintenance schedule on the building they owned, in addition to their primary residence. She'd once caught a significant error in the insurance coverage on Grant's commercial properties, the kind of error that would have cost him several $1,000,000 if it had gone unnoticed. She'd corrected it quietly, mentioned it to his property manager, and never told Grant directly because by then she had learned that pointing out problems made him defensive, and his defensiveness always circled back to her. He never knew. She sat in the diner and thought about that. How many times had she smoothed something over that he never saw? How many problems she had quietly solved in the background of his loud, successful life? You were never the woman I needed. She turned the words over the way you turn something sharp in your hand, feeling for the edge, wondering if it would cut worse the second time. It didn't. What surprised her, what frightened her a little, if she was being truthful with herself, was that she felt no particular desire to argue with him. No rage building in her chest. Just a strange, quiet clarity, like a window being cleaned from the inside. She left $20 on the table for a $4 coffee and picked up her suitcase and kept walking. She stayed that first night in a hotel 8 blocks from the harbor. A decent place, not expensive, the kind that doesn't ask questions. She sat on the edge of the bed in her wet coat for a long time before she thought to take it off. Her phone had 11 messages she hadn't opened, 3 from Grant's assistant, probably some procedural follow-up about the divorce paperwork, 1 from the building's property manager, the rest from a number she didn't recognize. She set the phone face down and lay back on the hotel bedspread and stared at the ceiling. She thought, I should feel something by now. She felt tired, that was all. Tired in a way that wasn't just physical. The kind of tired that happens when a person has been holding themselves very still for a very long time and has finally been allowed to stop. She fell asleep with her shoes on. The second day she spent doing practical things. She opened a bank account separate from the one she'd shared with Grant. She'd maintained a small personal account throughout their marriage. Nothing dramatic. A habit from her working years that she'd never abandoned for reasons she could never fully articulate. She contacted a former colleague from her law firm days, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had sent her a birthday card every year without fail, and whom Evelyn had always been slightly too busy to call back. Patricia answered on the second ring and said only, I've been wondering when you'd surface. They had lunch. Evelyn didn't explain everything. She explained enough, and Patricia listened with the particular patience of a woman who had heard many versions of this particular story and understood there was no version that didn't ache. What do you need? Patricia asked. Time, Evelyn said, and maybe a recommendation for a short-term rental. You can stay with me until you figure it out. I'm not ready to figure anything out. That, Patricia said, is exactly why you should. Evelyn didn't argue. She wasn't sure she had the energy for it. The second night, she ate actual food for the first time in 36 hours and slept without her coat on and didn't dream. The third morning was when the harbor changed. She had gone for a walk before Patricia's household came awake, needing the cold air and the absence of conversation. The harbor district was still quiet at 6 in the morning, fishing boats, a few early joggers, the low moan of a foghorn somewhere out past the breakwater. She had walked here in the evening sometimes during her marriage, when Grant had dinner meetings, and she found herself needing somewhere to put her hands that didn't involve their apartment. She was standing at the railing looking out at the water when she heard it. A different sound. Lower than the foghorn, deeper, the kind of sound that seems to travel through the ground rather than the air. She turned. The ship appeared out of the morning fog like something that shouldn't be real. It was enormous. Black hull, gold trim catching the early light. The kind of vessel that existed in a different category from the commercial ships that came through Caldwell Harbor. It moved with a slowness that somehow only emphasized its size, the way very powerful things sometimes move as though they have nothing to prove. Uniformed figures were visible along the upper deck. She counted at least a dozen, maybe more. The dock workers had stopped. The jogger who'd been pacing the waterfront stood with her hands on her hips, staring. Someone behind Evelyn said something under their breath that she couldn't make out. The yacht, because that's what it was, though the word felt absurdly insufficient, came to rest at the private berth at the far end of the harbor, the one that was almost never occupied. The city leased it to commercial vessels occasionally, but she couldn't remember the last time anything had actually docked there. Evelyn watched. A figure emerged from the main cabin onto the forward deck. She was too far away to read any detail. She could see he was tall. She could see the way the people around him arranged themselves, not casually, not informally, but with the specific, practiced efficiency of people who were trained to be exactly where they needed to be before they were asked. Something about that made the back of her neck prickle. She didn't stay. She turned and walked back to Patricia's apartment and told herself it was simply someone wealthy passing through the harbor. That was all. The city attracted money. This was not unusual. But she walked faster than she'd intended, and her hands were cold inside her pockets, and something in her chest was doing something she couldn't name. Not quite fear, not quite anticipation. Something older than either. By 10 o'clock that morning, Caldwell Harbor was not quiet anymore. Patricia's apartment had a television in the kitchen, and it was on during breakfast, tuned to the local news, because Patricia was a woman who liked to know what was happening in the world while she drank her coffee. Evelyn was washing her cup at the sink when the Chiron caught her eye. Unidentified luxury vessel arrives at Caldwell Harbor. Private berth. Speculation grows about owner's identity. She turned. The camera footage was shaky, shot from the dock, someone's phone. But the ship was unmistakable, black and gold against the morning gray. And then the anchor cut to a press conference that apparently had just concluded at the Harbor Authority building. She almost didn't understand what she was seeing, because there, standing in front of a room full of reporters who all seemed to be trying very hard not to look nervous, was a man in a dark overcoat. Dark hair, cut close. Face that was sharp in the way that suggested it had weathered things and come out harder. He wasn't reading from notes. He wasn't smiling. He spoke for approximately 90 seconds. Then a photograph appeared on the screen behind him. Evelyn's coffee cup hit the floor. The photograph was of her. It was not a recent photograph. She looked younger in it, early 30s maybe, her hair longer, standing somewhere she didn't immediately recognize. But it was absolutely, unambiguously her face. Her face on a screen in her colleague's kitchen in a city where she'd been invisible for 7 years. The man at the podium was speaking again. The news anchor's voice cut over his, translating the substance of what he'd already said. The statement released alongside the press conference names the woman as the rightful heir to a private family legacy tied to the Varelli organization. The man, identified only as Lucian, no surname provided, is believed to be the head of a powerful international private enterprise. He is requesting that the woman in the photograph be located and brought to speak with him directly. He describes her as, quote, family. Patricia was standing in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug forgotten in her hand. Evelyn, she said carefully, do you know who that is? Evelyn couldn't look away from the screen. From her own face, projected up there in that Harbor Authority room, in front of cameras, in front of a city that had never once paid attention to her. No, she said, and that was true. But something in her blood was saying otherwise, something very old and very quiet, something that had been still for so long it felt like silence, was suddenly not still at all. Her phone was on the counter. The messages from the unknown number, all 7 of them, were still unopened. She picked up the phone. The first message was 6 words. We have been looking for you. The second was longer. She read it twice. Her hands were not entirely steady. The third message contained a photograph, different from the one on the television screen. This one she recognized immediately. A man and a small girl standing somewhere with a lot of light. The man was younger, thinner, something worn around his eyes. But he was the same man she'd just seen on that screen. And the small girl. Evelyn sat down on the kitchen floor. Not gracefully, not dramatically. She simply ran out of the ability to stand, because she recognized the small girl's face too. She had been looking at it in mirrors for 4 decades. Grant Holloway found out about the ship the same way everyone else in the city did. Through his phone, mid-morning, when his assistant forwarded him the news alert with a note that said, "Is this someone we know?" He read the alert, looked at the photograph, and laughed. It was a short laugh, dismissive. The laugh of a man who had spent so many years being the most powerful person in any room that other people's power had become something of an abstraction. Mafia theater, he told his assistant. Someone trying to make noise. Ignore it. He went back to his 11 o'clock. By noon, 2 of his junior executives had flagged it again. By 2 o'clock, his head of corporate security had asked for a private meeting. By 4 o'clock, the photograph on the news, the photograph of the woman standing in the unfamiliar place with the longer hair, had been identified. Not by the press. By someone inside his own organization. The name on the identification, passed up the chain to Grant's desk in a manila folder at 4:17 in the afternoon, was one he recognized. He sat with it for a long time. His ex-wife. The quiet woman he'd signed papers with 3 days ago. The woman he'd told, without particular feeling, "You were never the woman I needed." He looked at the photograph on his phone screen again, then at the name in the folder, then at the legal documents his security chief had quietly pulled, documents he had never seen, documents that suggested the woman he'd spent 7 years dismissing had a history so far outside the boundaries of his world that he couldn't yet measure the distance. Grant Holloway was not a man who frightened easily. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. Find her, he said. Evelyn did not need to be found. She walked to the harbor herself. Patricia had tried to stop her, not with force, with the quiet reasonableness of a woman who understood that some decisions could not be made for other people. She had asked all the right questions. She had pointed out all the obvious risks. She had said, "You don't know this person. You don't know what that organization is. You don't know what they want from you." Evelyn had listened to all of it. Then she had put on her coat and said, "I know. That's why I have to go." The guards at the berth were expecting her. She didn't know how. She hadn't called ahead. She hadn't responded to the messages. She'd simply come. But when she reached the dock, a man in a dark suit stepped forward with something that was not quite a bow and not quite a nod, somewhere in between, and said, "Ms. Marlowe, he's been waiting." She walked up the gangway with her heart doing something uncomfortable inside her chest. The ship was even larger up close. The deck was immaculate. She could smell salt and something else, machine oil, fresh wood, something expensive she couldn't name. They took her through a corridor and a set of doors and into a room that was warm and quiet, with one long window looking out at the harbor. He was standing with his back to the door when she entered. He didn't turn immediately. He let the silence settle. Then he turned. Up close, he was harder to look at than he'd been on a television screen, not because he was frightening, though she suspected he frequently was, because there was something in his face that she was not prepared for, something that looked impossibly like relief. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't." She kept her voice level, kept her hands still at her sides. She had spent 7 years managing her own reactions under pressure. She was good at this, at least. "You made it very public. I want to know why." "Because quiet methods have not worked for 11 years. He said it simply. "I needed you to understand that this was real." "What I understand," she said, "is that my face was on a news broadcast, without my knowledge, without my permission." "Yes, that's not an apology." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She studied him. He studied her back. Neither of them looked away. "The photograph," she said finally. "The one in the message. The little girl." Something in his face shifted. Not softened exactly. More like the surface of something moving over what was underneath. "Yes. That's me." "Yes. Which means you knew me. Before." "Yes." She sat down on the chair nearest to her because her legs had made a decision she hadn't consulted them about. He didn't move. He waited while she got herself sorted, and she appreciated that more than she would have admitted. "Tell me everything," she said. He pulled a chair across from her, sat down, and looked at her the way people look at each other when they have a very long thing to say and no good place to start. "It begins," he said quietly, "before either of us was old enough to understand what it meant." The harbor shifted outside the window. The city moved on beyond the glass. And for the first time in 7 years, Evelyn Marlowe stopped being invisible. Not because the world was watching, but because someone across the table finally said her name like it mattered which woman it belonged to. She leaned forward. She listened. Lucian Varelli did not tell her everything that first night. He told her enough. He told her the shape of it, the outline, the broad geography of a story that spanned more years than she'd been aware of living. He told her about the Marlowe-Varelli alliance, 2 families bound together across 2 continents through business and bloodline, legitimate enterprises that had built infrastructure in 6 countries before someone decided the whole architecture was worth more destroyed than intact. He told her about the fire that killed her parents when she was 4 years old. He told her that the fire was not an accident. He told her that she had been placed with a distant relative, a woman named Clara Marlowe, her father's second cousin, who raised her in a small town 3 states away under instructions to keep her ordinary, to keep her quiet, to keep her alive. Clara had died when Evelyn was 19. A stroke, the doctor said, fast and clean. Lucian's jaw tightened when he said that. "You think Clara's death wasn't natural either," Evelyn said. "I think a lot of things that I cannot yet prove." "That's not an answer." "No," he said, "it isn't." She sat with that for a moment. The room was warm. Outside, the harbor was dark now, the city lights doing their imperfect job of replacing the sun. She was aware that she had been sitting in this chair for over 2 hours and that her body was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Why you?" she asked. "Why are you the one looking for me?" Something moved across his face. Not discomfort exactly. More like the expression of a man who has rehearsed an answer for a long time and is deciding in the moment whether to give the rehearsed one or the true one. Because your father was the only man who ever pulled me out of something I could not pull myself out of, he said. I was 17. I was in a situation that should have ended me. Your father did not have to help. He chose to. He chose to because he believed people were worth more than their worst circumstances. He paused. I have not forgotten that. Evelyn looked at him steadily. He sounds like someone I would have wanted to know. He was, Lucian said, and this time the words came out rougher, less controlled, and she believed them. She stood. Her knees protested. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed for a moment and then straightened. I need to sleep, she said. I need to sleep and eat something that isn't coffee, and then I need you to tell me the rest of it. All of it. Not the outline, the details. Lucian nodded once. He stood as well. Reflexively, she thought, the gesture of a man who'd been raised with certain habits he'd never entirely shed. There are rooms prepared, he said. I'm not agreeing to anything, she said. I'm agreeing to sleep on your boat, that's all. I know. She moved toward the door, then stopped. She turned back. The photograph, she said. In the message. You and the little girl. Where was it taken? He looked at her for a long moment before he answered. Your family's house, he said. 2 weeks before the fire. She nodded. She didn't trust herself to say anything else right then. She walked out. He watched her go. Neither of them had any idea, yet, how much the next 24 hours were going to cost them both. She woke at 4 in the morning to the sound of voices. Not alarmed voices. She registered that first, lying still in the unfamiliar bed, her whole body going quiet the way bodies do when they're trying to gather information before they commit to a reaction. The voices were down the corridor, 2 of them, low, quick, the specific cadence of men who are arguing while trying not to be heard arguing. She recognized Lucian's voice. She did not recognize the other. She got up. She did not put on her shoes. She moved to the door in socked feet and opened it 3 inches and listened. Cannot continue to assume she's clean, the other voice was saying. The accent was precise, European, with the flattened vowels of a man who had learned English as a calculated professional choice rather than a natural one. You bring her onto this ship, you expose everything we've spent years protecting. She's not a threat. Lucian's voice was quieter, harder. You don't know that. You know the girl you saw in a photograph 20 years ago. People change. People are turned. You of all people should understand what someone with her background could be leveraged into. Victor. The name landed like a door closing. That's enough. Silence. Then, I'm asking you to be careful. That's all I'm asking. I heard you. Lucian, I said I heard you. More silence. Then footsteps. The other man, walking away from Lucian, not toward Evelyn's end of the corridor, but she pulled the door shut anyway and stood in the dark with her back against it and let her heart do what it needed to do. Victor. She filed the name, filed the voice, filed the precise shape of what she'd heard. Not the words, but the intention underneath the words, the particular texture of concern that wasn't quite concern, that had something harder at its center. She had been a contract lawyer for 6 years. She knew the difference between a man worried about an outcome and a man worried about being found out. That voice had been the second kind. She went back to bed. She did not sleep again until nearly 6. Breakfast on the yacht was brought to her room by a young woman named Sol, who said almost nothing and moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned that questions created complications. Coffee, eggs, toast, a glass of juice. Real food. Evelyn ate all of it, which surprised her, and then sat with the coffee and looked out the porthole at the harbor. The city was awake now. She could see it from here. The buildings, the waterfront traffic, the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning. She had a sudden vertiginous sense of how strange it was to be sitting here. How 3 days ago she had been in a different life entirely, in an apartment she shared with a man who had stopped seeing her, and now she was on a ship that shouldn't be real, eating breakfast she hadn't made, surrounded by people she didn't know, in possession of a history she was only beginning to understand. She thought about Grant, not with longing, more the way you think about a country you used to live in, recognizing the shape of it, understanding what it cost you, not particularly wishing you were still there. She wondered if he'd seen the news broadcast. She suspected he had. She suspected he had his lawyers working on something. She did not know exactly what, but she knew Grant well enough to know that the idea of Evelyn being important to someone powerful would not sit easily with him. Grant's relationship with power was very specific. He needed to be the most powerful person in any dynamic he occupied. The revelation that his quiet, ignored ex-wife was connected to something vast and opaque would not read as interesting to him. It would read as threatening. That, she realized, was going to be a problem. A knock at the door. She said, "Come in." Lucian entered. He looked like he had also not slept particularly well. There were shadows under his eyes that she didn't think were chronic. But he was fully dressed, the dark overcoat replaced by a charcoal jacket and a plain shirt, and he moved with the same economy of motion she'd observed the night before. A man who had learned a long time ago not to waste himself on unnecessary movement. "There's someone I need you to meet," he said. "Good morning to you too." Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. "Good morning. There's someone I need you to meet." "Who?" "My chief advisor, Victor Rainsford." She put the coffee cup down, carefully, kept her face exactly as it had been a moment before. "All right," she said. Victor Rainsford was 62 years old and looked like a man who had spent those 62 years perfecting the art of being underestimated. Medium height, silver-haired, with the kind of face that arranged itself naturally into an expression of thoughtful concern. He wore his clothes the way cautious men wear them. Well-fitted, but not flashy, everything designed to communicate competence without provoking attention. When he shook Evelyn's hand, his grip was measured, exactly firm enough to be respectful, not a fraction beyond that. "Ms. Marlowe," he said warmly, "it's an honor, truly." "Thank you," she said. She watched his eyes. They were pale, grayish-blue, and they were busy behind the warmth, moving across her face with the speed of someone cross-referencing what they were seeing against something they already knew. Lucian was watching them both. They sat in the main lounge, a long room with low sofas and a table that could seat 12, currently set for 3. Coffee service in the center. Victor poured for her without asking, and she let him because it gave her something to observe. How a man serves coffee when he thinks he is the one actually in control of the room. "Lucian tells me you're adjusting to all of this quite well," Victor said. "I'm not sure I'd use the word adjusting. I've been listening." "Of course." He nodded. "It's a great deal to take in. We understand that. The history alone." He made a small gesture, the kind meant to convey the enormity of something while keeping the speaker positioned above it. "Tell me about the history," she said. "From your perspective. You've been with Lucian a long time?" 20 years, Victor said. "I was present during the early period of Reconstruction after your family's—" He paused with the practiced delicacy of a man who has learned that pauses communicate sensitivity. "After what happened?" "After my parents were killed," she said. A brief stillness around the table. Victor nodded again, slower this time. "Yes." "So you were involved in the investigation into what happened to them?" "In a supporting capacity. The primary investigation was conducted by—" "Did you know my father?" The question landed differently than the others. She watched it land, watched the fraction of a second that elapsed before his expression completed its movement into something that looked like fond sadness. "By reputation, primarily. We met twice. He was an extraordinary man." Lucian said he was. "He was." She picked up her coffee cup. "What did you think of him? Not the reputation, your personal impression." Victor looked at her with an expression of warm attentiveness that had nothing behind it, nothing she could identify, like a window someone had painted to look like a window. He was precisely the kind of man one hoped to meet, principled, perceptive. "Perceptive," she repeated. "Yes." Interesting word to choose. Across the table, Lucian had gone very still. Victor smiled. "I suppose I meant that he understood people well. He had good instincts for character." "Yes," Evelyn said pleasantly. "I imagine those instincts would have been useful." She set the coffee cup down and smiled back at him and watched his eyes recalibrate very quickly before the warmth reassembled itself over the top. After the meeting, Lucian walked with her to the forward deck. The morning was cold and clean, the harbor wind cutting through everything. She stood at the rail with both hands on the metal and looked out at the water and didn't say anything for almost a full minute. What did you think? Lucian asked. I think, she said carefully, that he's very good. Victor is the most effective strategist I've ever worked with. I believe that. He turned to look at her. That isn't a compliment. No. She turned to look at him back. It isn't. A muscle in his jaw worked. You've been in a room with him for 40 minutes. I know. She turned back to the water. I'm probably wrong. She didn't sound like she thought she was probably wrong. Lucian didn't push it, but she noticed that he didn't dismiss it either, and she filed that too. The documents arrived that afternoon. Lucian had a team, a legal team and an investigative team, distinct from each other but occasionally overlapping, and they had been working for some time on assembling the formal record of the Marlowe-Varelli inheritance, property records, corporate filings, trust documentation going back 31 years, medical records confirming bloodline through DNA comparison with samples Lucian had provided. He spread them on the table in the room where they'd spoken the night before. She sat across from him and went through them methodically, page by page, in the way she'd once gone through contracts, reading everything, trusting nothing until she'd read it herself. It took 3 hours. When she finished, she sat back and pressed 2 fingers against the space between her eyebrows and breathed. It's real, she said. Yes. All of it. The properties, the accounts, the business interests. Yes. She dropped her hand. How much? He told her. The number sat between them like a third person in the room. She looked at it for a moment and then looked at him. And this has been held in trust since your parents died. Accruing. Untouched. Untouched, she repeated, for 37 years while I was... She stopped. She pressed her lips together, started again. While I was being raised in a house that had a leaking roof for 2 years because my aunt couldn't afford to fix it. Lucian's face didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Yes. That's not something I can feel calm about. I know. Don't tell me I know. Just let me be angry about it for a moment. He said nothing. He let her be angry about it for a moment. She sat with her jaw tight and her hands flat on the table and let herself feel the specific, clean fury of a woman who has just understood the full dimensions of something that was stolen from her, and it was large, and it was heavy, and it was going to take a long time to put down. Then she said, What do I need to do to formally claim it? Sign the preliminary claim documents. Appear before the oversight panel. They'll require your identification. The DNA confirmation is already on file, but there's a formal proceeding. When? We were going to propose next week, but... Her phone buzzed on the table between them. She glanced at it. Patricia's name. She picked it up. Pat. Evelyn. Patricia's voice was clipped in a way that meant she'd been trying to stay calm for a while. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not react immediately. Can you do that? Evelyn looked across the table at Lucian. I can try. Grant's lawyers filed a motion this morning. They're claiming that your divorce agreement was signed under duress. They're trying to void it. The room was very quiet. They're also claiming, Patricia continued more slowly, that certain financial decisions made during the marriage, decisions involving Grant's company, were made with your knowledge and involvement. They're suggesting that your departure and this... She paused. This situation with the ship may constitute evidence of undisclosed financial interests that affected your husband's company. He's trying to tie me to his company, Evelyn said. He's trying to make it look like you were hiding something from him, which would mean the divorce terms were based on incomplete disclosure, which would mean the whole thing could be relitigated. Yes. Evelyn set the phone down on the table. She didn't hang up. She could hear Patricia still talking. But she set it flat against the wood and looked at the ceiling and breathed very carefully for approximately 4 seconds. Then she picked it back up. Patricia, I need you to pull every document related to the insurance correction I made on the Meridian Street properties, 2019. I need the original policy, my communications with the property manager, and the amended filing. I don't have access to those. You do. I sent you a copy of everything I kept from the marriage. You have a folder on your drive I labeled Admin History. It's in there. A pause. Evelyn, when did you... A few years ago. I wasn't sure why I did it then. I'm sure now. Send everything to me encrypted. She hung up. She looked at Lucian. I need a lawyer, she said. Your legal team. Are any of them licensed to practice in this jurisdiction? Two of them, yes. I need to talk to them today. He was already reaching for his phone. The next thing happened fast, the way bad things tend to happen. Not all at once, but in quick succession, each piece arriving before you finished processing the last. The first piece was the news alert at 6 o'clock. Grant had given a statement to the press. He did not name Evelyn directly. His lawyers were too careful for that. But the statement referenced a former personal associate with undisclosed international connections, and it didn't take long for the financial press to connect the dots. By 7 o'clock, her name was in 3 separate online articles. By 8 o'clock, 2 of them had been updated with photographs. Not the harbor photograph, but older ones, lifted from social records. Images of her at Grant's company events, standing at his side, looking exactly like what he was now trying to make her into. A knowing participant in something she had, in fact, known nothing about. The second piece was a message from a number she didn't recognize. Not the same unknown number as before, a new one. The message contained 2 sentences. You should ask Lucian who arranged your marriage. Ask him what Victor told him in 2016. She read it 3 times, then she deleted it. Then she sat in her room and thought about it for a long time. The third piece arrived when she went back to find Lucian. She found him in the corridor outside the communications room, and he was not alone. Victor was there, and one of the ship's senior staff. And the particular atmosphere in that corridor was the atmosphere of men who have just received news and are deciding how to arrange it before it has to be shared. Lucian looked up when he saw her. Something moved across his face, too quickly. There's something I need to tell you, he said. Yes, she said. There is, but I'm going to go first. She pulled out her phone. She'd screenshotted the message before she deleted it. Years of careful habit serving her again, the same instinct that had kept copies in Patricia's drive. She held the phone up so Lucian could see the screen. She watched his face with the focus of a woman who had spent 7 years learning to read the things men don't say out loud. He read it. The stillness that moved over him was different from his usual stillness, not controlled, not the stillness of a man conserving energy. The stillness of a man who has just been hit somewhere internal and is working out the damage. Behind him, she saw Victor. Victor, who was also looking at the phone. Victor, whose pale eyes were absolutely, deliberately, elaborately calm. What happened in 2016? She asked Lucian. His jaw was tight. Evelyn, what happened in 2016? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Victor. And Victor said nothing. He looked at neither of them. He looked at the wall with the composed, waiting expression of a man who has prepared for this question and has already decided exactly how he is going to answer it when the time comes. Not now, on someone else's schedule, but later, on his. Come inside, Lucian said to Evelyn. Please. Tell me what happened in 2016. I will. Inside. She didn't move. Did you know about my marriage to Grant before it happened? The silence was its own kind of answer. Lucian. Her voice was very flat now. Flat the way ground gets flat when everything on top of it has been cleared away. Did you know? It's more complicated than, did you know? He looked at her. He did not look away, which she gave him credit for. Not many men would hold that gaze right now. I knew, he said, that someone had arranged for you to be introduced to Grant Holloway. I did not know, at the time, who had arranged it. I found out in 2016, 3 years after your marriage. And by then, he stopped. His hands, at his sides, were not entirely still. By then I was trying to find a way to reach you that would not put you in more danger than you were already in. More danger. Yes. So you let me stay in that marriage. I was trying to find a way. For how long? Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that later, when she thought about it. How many years did you know I was sitting in that man's house while you were trying to find a way? He had the decency not to answer immediately, not to give her a number that would make it sound reasonable. 4 years, he finally said. The corridor was very quiet. Behind Lucian, Victor was perfectly still, perfectly composed, watching them both with the pale, busy eyes of a man who understood exactly what was unfolding and had known, long before either of them, precisely how this moment would arrive. Evelyn looked at Lucian. She held his gaze for a count of 5, 6, 7. Long enough for him to understand that she was not going to look away, and that she was not going to give him something easier to respond to. Then she said, "I'm going to need you to be completely honest with me from this point forward. Not managed honesty, not strategic honesty. Everything. Yes. And I'm going to need you to tell me," she said, "exactly who arranged my marriage to Grant Holloway." Lucian looked at her. Then he looked past her, very briefly, at Victor. Victor looked back at him with an expression of perfect, sympathetic concern. And Evelyn, watching the thing that passed between those two men in that fraction of a second, the history in it, the weight, the specific geometry of trust straining against something it had never been built to hold, understood, with the same cold clarity she'd once used to read contracts, that she was not standing at the beginning of the answer. She was standing at the edge of the thing that had been hidden all along, and someone in this corridor had been keeping it hidden, and one of the two men in front of her knew exactly who that person was, and was not yet ready to say it out loud. She crossed her arms. She settled her weight. She looked at Lucian Varelli, and she waited. She had become very good, over the years, at waiting. Lucian moved first. He stepped back from the corridor and opened the door to the communications room and held it, not with deference, not with apology, but with the specific gravity of a man who understood that what was about to happen required 4 walls and no witnesses beyond the necessary ones. Evelyn walked past him without touching him. Victor followed. The door closed. The room was smaller than the main lounge, functional, utilitarian, screens along one wall, a central table with 4 chairs. Evelyn sat in the one nearest the door. Victor sat across from her. Lucian remained standing, which told her something about his state of mind. Men who remain standing in rooms like this are men who don't trust themselves to sit still. "Victor," Lucian said, just the name, nothing attached to it. Victor looked up with the patient expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific question for a very long time and has made his peace with the waiting. "I think," Victor said carefully, "that before we go any further, Evelyn should understand the full context of the decisions that were made." "Don't tell me what I should understand," Evelyn said. "Answer the question." Victor's eyes moved to her, that pale, calibrating gaze. "The question being, did you arrange my marriage to Grant Holloway?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "I facilitated an introduction," Victor said. "That is accurate." The air in the room changed. She felt it change, felt the temperature of it, the density. Lucian's hands, at his sides, had gone completely still in the way that things go still before they break. "Facilitated," she said. "The situation in 2013 was extremely precarious. You were living alone in the city. You had no protection. The people who had been watching you for years, the same people responsible for what happened to your parents, had begun to make moves. We needed you placed somewhere that appeared stable, somewhere that looked, from the outside, like an ordinary life. You used Grant. Grant Holloway was a useful structure, a prominent man, a visible household, a social position that would make it difficult for anyone to approach you directly. You would be, for all practical purposes, hidden in plain sight." She looked at him for a long moment. She was aware of her own breathing, steady, deliberate, the breathing of a woman keeping something very large contained inside a very small space. "For all practical purposes," she said, "I was being used as an asset. You were being kept alive. I was being managed." Her voice was quiet. It was the quieter for being quiet. "Without my knowledge, without my consent. You took my life and you arranged it to suit your operational needs and you called it protection." Victor's expression didn't waver. "Would you have consented at the time? If we had approached you in 2013 and told you everything, the bloodline, the inheritance, the enemies, would you have accepted our protection willingly? That's not the point. I think it's precisely the point. The point," she said, "is that you didn't give me the choice. You made the decision that I couldn't be trusted with my own life, and you acted on that decision for 7 years. 7 years, Victor. 7 years in a house with a man who looked at me like I was something he'd misplaced, because you decided that was safer for me." Something moved across Victor's face. Something real for once. Not the warmth, not the concern. Something older and harder, and more honest than either of those. "Yes," he said. "That's what I decided." The honesty of it stopped her for just a moment. She hadn't expected it. She'd expected deflection, more careful language, more strategic positioning. Not that flat, clean yes. She turned to Lucian. When you found out in 2016 that Victor had arranged it, I confronted him, Lucian said. His voice was controlled, but it cost him something. He explained the reasoning, the threat assessment, the decision-making process at the time. He paused. I disagreed with how it was handled. I believed you should have been told. But you didn't tell me. I was trying to find the right... You didn't tell me, she said again. He stopped. He accepted that. So both of you, she said, made decisions about my life, without me. And you have both been carrying this for years. And neither of you thought, at any point in those years, that I was capable of handling the truth. Neither man answered immediately. Victor because he was measuring his response. Lucian because he was honest enough to understand that his answer was insufficient. It was that silence, that specific damning silence, that told her everything remaining she needed to know about the shape of what had been done to her. She stood up. For a walk. Evelyn, on the deck. I'm not leaving the ship. She looked at Lucian. We're not done, but I need 10 minutes where no one is explaining anything to me. She walked out. Neither man followed. The deck was cold, and the wind was brutal, and she stood at the rail with both hands gripping the metal and let it be brutal. The harbor was gray and choppy. A fishing boat was moving out toward the open water, small and determined against the chop. She watched it until it was small. She had been managed. That was the word that kept coming back. Managed like a problem, like a variable in someone else's equation. She had spent 7 years inside a marriage that was, at its origin, at its foundational level, a strategic placement. Grant had been a container. She had been the thing stored inside the container. And the worst of it, the part she kept circling back to with the grinding persistence of a thought that won't be finished with, was that it had worked. She had been invisible. She had been unremarkable. She had been, by every measurable standard, a woman no one bothered to look at twice. She had been perfectly, comprehensively hidden. She thought about Clara, her aunt, the woman who raised her, who had died of a stroke at 61 and who had never once, not once in all the years of Evelyn's childhood, given any indication of the thing she was carrying, the weight of knowing, the weight of the arrangement, the specific, exhausting performance of a woman pretending that an ordinary life was simply an ordinary life. Had Clara known? Had she known about Victor? About Lucian? About the money sitting in trust somewhere while her roof leaked? The fishing boat was gone. She turned back toward the ship. She found Lucian alone. Victor had gone. She didn't ask where, and Lucian didn't volunteer it. They sat across from each other at the small table, and Lucian put a cup of coffee in front of her, and she drank it without tasting it. The documents, she said, the inheritance documents. If I sign the preliminary claim, what's the timeline? 3 to 4 weeks for the oversight panel to convene, another 2 weeks for formal processing. Then, who knows we have the documents? He looked at her. My legal team. Victor. A notary in Brussels who certified 3 of the supporting records. Victor helped assemble them? He's been working on this case for 8 years. She put the cup down. And if someone wanted to stop the claim, what would they need to do? Legally? Challenge the documentation. Introduce counter-evidence disputing the bloodline or the original trust terms. That would take time, months, possibly years in arbitration. And illegally? His jaw tightened. Make the documents disappear, or make the claimant disappear. She nodded once. The anonymous message, the one I showed you in the corridor. I've had my security team trying to trace the number. And? Disposable, routed through 3 countries, nothing yet. Someone on this ship sent it, she said. Lucian looked at her. We don't know. Lucian. She kept her voice even. The message appeared within 2 hours of my arrival on this ship. It contained specific information, the year 2016, the specific nature of the arrangement. That is not public knowledge. The number of people who could have sent it is very small. She paused. I don't believe it was you. Why not? Because if you wanted to warn me about Victor, you would have said it to my face. You're not a man who communicates indirectly. Something in his expression shifted. The faintest acknowledgement of being accurately read by someone he hadn't expected to read him that accurately. No, he said, I'm not. So who on this ship knows what happened in 2016, has reason to want me warned, and would do it anonymously rather than directly? He was quiet for a long time. Then, there's a woman on my legal team, Dara Len. She's been with me for 6 years. She was present in 2016 when I confronted Victor. He stopped. She objected to my decision to delay telling you, strongly. I need to talk to her. I'll arrange it. Now, Evelyn said. Darlene was 38 years old, compact and precise, with the look of a woman who had learned to take up exactly as much space as her work required, and not a centimeter more. She came into the room with a tablet under her arm, and sat down across from Evelyn, and looked at her with the directness of someone who had already decided to stop being careful. You sent the message, Evelyn said. Yes, Dara said. Lucian, standing by the window, exhaled through his nose. Why anonymously? Evelyn asked. Because I wanted you to have the information before anyone could frame it for you. If I came to you directly, Victor would know within the hour. I needed you to have time to decide what to do with it. Dara set the tablet on the table. And I need you to look at something. She turned the tablet around. On the screen was a document, scanned, the edges slightly soft, the kind of scan made from an original physical page. Evelyn leaned forward. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. Then she understood. Then she read it again to be certain. It was an internal communication, dated 4 years ago. The header identified it as a memo within Victor's private correspondence files. The body was 3 paragraphs. She read all 3 paragraphs twice. By the second reading, her hands were completely flat on the table because she needed them to be flat on something. The memo outlined a contingency. Victor's contingency. Written in the careful, depersonalized language of a man who had spent decades writing things down in ways that could not be used against him directly. The contingency involved the inheritance claim. Specifically, it outlined what should happen if the heir were located and the claim were about to be filed. It described a series of steps. The steps involved the claimant's legal documentation, specifically how that documentation could be accessed, compromised, and rendered invalid. It referenced a contact outside the organization, unnamed, described only by a code designation. The code designation was the same 3 letters as the internal designation used in Grant Holloway's company records for his head of corporate intelligence. She sat back. She pressed her palms against her thighs. She looked at the ceiling for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at Lucian. Victor has been in contact with someone inside Grant's company, she said. Lucian looked at the tablet. The color of his face had changed. Not dramatically, not in the way that shows in films, but in the specific, subtle way of a man whose blood has redirected itself away from his surface because his body understands, before his mind has finished processing, that something foundational has just cracked. When did you find this? He asked Dara. 3 weeks ago. I've been trying to verify it independently before bringing it forward. Dara kept her eyes on Evelyn. The reason I needed you here, specifically, the reason I sent the message, is that the contact in Grant's company isn't just a passive informant. According to the financial records I've been able to trace, money has moved, in both directions, over 18 months. Victor has been funding something inside Grant's company, Evelyn said. Yes. Or Grant's company has been funding Victor. Dara nodded. Or both. Evelyn looked at Lucian. Grant's lawyers filed that motion this morning, trying to void the divorce, trying to connect me to his company's financial decisions. Yes. Victor knew I was here. Victor knew I'd be filing the inheritance claim. Yes. So Victor is working with someone inside Grant's operation to build a case that ties me to financial misconduct, which would give them grounds to freeze any inheritance claim pending investigation, which would... She stopped. She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth, breathed, which would buy them time to access and destroy the documentation. The room was very quiet. Then Lucian said, Where are the documents? He was looking at Dara. Dara's expression changed, the first time since she'd entered the room that something moved across her face that wasn't controlled. They were in the secure filing system, she said, backed up in 3 locations. Were, Evelyn said. Dara looked at her. An hour ago, our IT security flagged an anomalous access event. Someone with internal credentials accessed 2 of the 3 backup locations. She paused. Both copies were deleted. The silence had a different quality now. Heavier. The kind of silence that forms when several people in a room are separately doing the same arithmetic and arriving at the same answer. The third backup, Lucian said, physically stored, off the ship, in a location only I know. Dara looked at Evelyn. And now you. Where is Victor now? Evelyn asked. I don't know, Lucian said. He was already moving toward the door. He pulled it open and said something to someone outside in a low, sharp voice. Then he turned back. We're locking down the ship. No one on or off without my clearance. That won't be enough, Evelyn said. If he has people inside your organization, I know. And if he's already made contact with whoever he's working with in Grant's company, I know, Evelyn. The oversight panel, she said. The Brussels notary. Are they safe? Lucian stopped moving. She watched him stop moving, and she watched him understand, in real time, that he didn't know. That he had built his operation over 20 years on a foundation that included Victor Rainsford and had never, not fully, not structurally, considered what happened if that foundation wasn't what he thought it was. It was the first time she had seen him look uncertain. It lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then his face did what faces do when a decision has been made. It settled. It hardened. It became the face of a man who has accepted the situation as it is and has moved forward. Get Dara's document secured, he said to Evelyn. Every copy, everything she has. I want it in your possession, not on this ship's system. You're trusting me with it. Yes. You barely know me. I know, he said. Get it anyway. He left. The door swung behind him. Evelyn looked at Dara. Dara looked at her. There was, between them, the very specific understanding of two women who have just watched the men around them discover, belatedly, that the situation is more broken than they were managing it as. How much do you have? Evelyn asked. Everything I've collected in 3 weeks. Financial traces, the memo, 6 months of communication logs I was able to pull before Victor locked down his personal correspondence files. You anticipated he'd lock them down? Yes. When? 2 days ago. When I found out you were coming. Evelyn looked at the tablet on the table. Then she looked at the door Lucian had gone through. Then she looked at her own hands, which were steady, which had been steady this entire time, which were going to stay steady because there was no alternative to steadiness right now. One more thing, she said. The contact in Grant's company. The one Victor has been in communication with. Do you have a name? Dara reached across the table and scrolled the tablet to a different page. Evelyn looked at the name. She had not expected it. That was the thing. That was the specific, nauseating thing about the moment. She had genuinely not expected it. She had been prepared for bad. She had been prepared for complicated. She had been steeling herself for ugly. But the name on the screen was not a stranger's name. It was not the name of a corporate operative or an unknown functionary. It was the name of a person she had sat across a lunch table from 2 days ago. A person who had said, in the warm, quiet voice of someone who had known her for years, I've been wondering when you'd surface, Patricia Holt. Evelyn sat with it. She sat with it the way you sit with something when your mind keeps trying to hand it back and your instinct keeps refusing to take it. She read the name 3 more times. Then she looked up at the porthole, at the gray harbor, at the cold and indifferent water. Patricia, who had sent her a birthday card every year without fail. Patricia, who had answered on the second ring. Patricia, who had files, Evelyn's files, 7 years of carefully maintained personal records, insurance documents, property records, financial correspondence, on a drive in her apartment. Files that Evelyn had called her about 2 days ago. Files that Evelyn had asked her to pull and send. Files that Patricia now knew Evelyn needed urgently, and why. Her phone was in her pocket. She had sent Patricia an encrypted request for those documents less than 8 hours ago. She pulled the phone out and opened the message thread. The documents had been sent. She'd received them. She'd opened them. She looked at the metadata on the received files. The send timestamp. The IP address of origin. The IP address was not Patricia's apartment. It was the Holloway Group building, Grant's office, the 42nd floor. Evelyn put the phone face down on the table. She put both hands flat beside it. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and she did this 3 times with the deliberateness of a woman who understands that the next thing she does will define a significant boundary, the boundary between who she has been and who she is going to have to become. Then she picked up the phone. She opened the files Patricia had sent her. She went through them quickly, with the speed of someone who knows exactly what she's looking for and exactly what its absence means. The insurance correction documents were there, the original policy, her communications with the property manager. But something else was there too. Something she had never put in that folder, something she had never shared with Patricia or anyone else. A document she had kept on her own personal drive, encrypted, which contained notes she had made over 2 years during her marriage about certain financial irregularities she'd noticed in Grant's company. Irregularities she'd seen peripherally, through the household management, through invoices and vendor contacts that passed through her hands. Notes she had written out of a lawyer's habit, telling herself they were nothing, telling herself she was being paranoid. That document was in the files Patricia had sent her. It had been accessed, not just sent, accessed, opened, its contents read. And in that document were the names of 3 specific transactions she'd noted. 3 transactions that, if someone were building a case that Evelyn had been actively involved in her husband's financial decisions, would look very different in the hands of a hostile lawyer than they had looked to her at the time. They had her notes. They had her words, in her own handwriting, on her own document, describing financial activity at Grant's company. Victor had them. Grant's people had them. She stood up from the table. Her legs were functioning. That was something. "We need to find Lucian," she said to Dara. "Right now." "What happened?" Evelyn was already at the door. "They have documentation that makes me look complicit in Grant's financial decisions. My own documentation. Notes I wrote in private over 2 years during the marriage." She looked back at Dara. "If that gets in front of the oversight panel before we file the inheritance claim, the claim is frozen pending investigation. If the claim is frozen, Victor has time to destroy the third backup. If the third backup is destroyed, there's no inheritance claim," Dara said. "There's no inheritance claim," Evelyn confirmed. She opened the door. Then she stopped. Something had arrived. A thought, a specific thought, the kind that arrives with the cold clarity of something that has been waiting for you to be ready to think it. "The notes in my document," she said slowly. "The 3 transactions I wrote about. I didn't know what they were at the time. I thought they were irregularities. But if Victor helped arrange my marriage, if Victor has had a connection to Grant's company for years," she turned to look at Dara. "Those transactions, is it possible they were Victor's, not Grant's?" Dara stared at her. "Is it possible," Evelyn continued, "that money was moving through Grant's company for years, money Victor controlled, and that Grant himself didn't know where it came from or what it was for? The same way Grant didn't know who I really was. The same way Grant was managed." The corridor beyond the door was empty. Somewhere deeper in the ship, she could hear voices. Lucian's people moving, the ship going into some kind of operational response. The sound of machinery under pressure. Dara said, if that's true, Evelyn said, then Grant isn't the architect. Grant is the same thing I was. A structure, a container." She stepped through the door into the corridor. "Victor has been running both sides of this for years, and we just ran out of time to prove it before he finishes what he started." She started moving down the corridor toward the sound of Lucian's voice, and behind her Dara followed, and the ship moved under them both with the slow, powerful indifference of something very large that does not care, at all, what the people on its surface are about to do to each other. She found Lucian in the operations room at the stern of the ship. He was standing over a table covered in printed documents and open laptops. 3 of his people arranged around him in the specific formation of individuals who have received bad news and are trying to convert it into action before the weight of it settles. When Evelyn came through the door, he looked up and she saw it in his face immediately. He already knew something, not everything, but something new had arrived in the 3 minutes since she'd left the corridor, and it had not improved the situation. "Victor is off the ship," Lucian said. She stopped moving. "When?" "Approximately 40 minutes ago, before the lockdown. He told the deck crew he was meeting with the harbor authority. He said it with the flat, controlled anger of a man who has been outmaneuvered in his own house and has not yet finished being angry about it. There was no meeting. I've confirmed that." "He knew it was coming," Dara said from behind Evelyn. "He knew the moment you confronted him in the corridor." "Where would he go?" Evelyn asked. "He has properties in the city, safe locations. We know of 3. Lucian looked at the man to his left. Mid-40s, gray at the temples, the bearing of someone with a military background that he'd never quite left behind. Reyes. Status? Teams at 2 of the 3 locations. Third is a commercial building. We can't go in without... Get someone on it. Yes. Evelyn moved to the table. She looked at the documents spread across it. Some she recognized from the inheritance files. Others she didn't. There's something you need to know, she said. Both of you. She told them about the files Patricia had sent, about the metadata, about the IP address, about her private notes, the ones she'd written during her marriage, the ones that were now in hostile hands. She told it quickly, without preamble, because there was no time left for preamble. When she finished, the room was the kind of quiet that precedes significant decisions. Lucian looked at her. The transactions you noted. You still remember the specifics? I wrote them down because I'm a lawyer who couldn't stop being a lawyer even after I stopped practicing. Yes, I remember them. If I give you access to our financial records from the same period, I can cross-reference them. Yes. She moved around the table toward one of the open laptops. But that takes time and we don't have time. Victor is out there with documentation that poisons my inheritance claim, and the oversight panel convenes in 11 days, Dara said. 11 days is not enough time to build a countercase from scratch. No, Lucian said, it isn't. He was looking at the table, not at any specific document, at the space above it, the middle distance, the place people look when they are doing very fast arithmetic about bad options. Then he looked up. Grant, he said. Evelyn looked at him. Grant doesn't know what Victor has been doing. If your theory is correct, if Grant has been managed the same way you were, if those transactions were Victor's money moving through his company, then Grant is sitting on evidence of Victor's activity without knowing it's evidence. He paused. And Grant just had his lawyers file a motion based on documents that Victor's contact fed them, documents that make you look complicit. Grant is being used, Evelyn said. Yes, and he doesn't know it. That doesn't make him an ally. No. Lucian straightened, but it might make him a pressure point. Grant Holloway did not take Evelyn's call. He took Lucian's. She stood in the operations room and listened to one side of a conversation that lasted 6 minutes and involved very few words from Lucian's end, a few precise sentences, a specific number spoken clearly, and then a silence of approximately 90 seconds during which, she imagined, Grant Holloway was doing the same arithmetic everyone else had been doing. Then a single sentence from Lucian that she felt in her sternum, even though she only half caught it. The man who benefited most from your success has been destroying it from the inside for 8 years, and tonight he's going to finish. Lucian lowered the phone. He's coming. To this ship. He wants neutral ground. There is no neutral ground. I know. He'll figure that out when he gets here. She breathed. Lucian, Grant is not... She stopped. Chose her words with the care of someone navigating ground that might not hold. Grant is not a good person. He's arrogant and he's careless, and he spent 7 years treating me like furniture. Whatever Victor did to him, whatever Victor used him for, he still made his own choices. I don't want to walk into a room with him and have him believe that I know, Lucian said. You don't owe him anything. I don't. This isn't about what you owe him. This is about what he knows that we need. She looked at him for a moment, then she nodded once. Fine, she said, but I'm in the room. I wasn't going to suggest otherwise. Grant arrived 40 minutes later. He came with one person, his head of corporate security, a man named Bauer, who had the dimensions of someone who had been large his entire adult life and had made professional use of it. Grant himself looked different from the last time she'd seen him. Not smaller. Grant Holloway was not a man who diminished easily, but something was off in the way he held himself. Something tight around his eyes that she didn't remember being there 3 days ago when he'd slid the papers across the desk with that dismissive, effortless certainty. He saw her and stopped moving. Evelyn. Grant. He looked at her for 3 full seconds, not with contempt, not with the impatient dismissal she knew well, but with something more complicated, something that had several layers and not all of them were comfortable for him. You look, we don't have time, she said. His jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being interrupted. Then, something she didn't expect. He let it go. He looked at Lucian. You said 8 years. Sit down, Lucian said. They sat. All of them. Evelyn, Lucian, Grant, Bauer against the wall. Dara at the end of the table, with her tablet and her collected 3 weeks of evidence and the specific focused energy of a woman who has been waiting to lay something in front of people who can use it. Dara presented it efficiently. The memo. The financial traces. The communication logs. The code designation that matched Grant's internal intelligence classification. The money moving in both directions over 18 months. She presented it the way lawyers present things, sequentially, without drama, letting the material carry the weight. Grant did not interrupt. That surprised Evelyn. She had expected him to interrupt constantly, to push back, to reassert, to make the room his room the way he always made rooms his rooms. Instead, he sat with his forearms on the table, and he listened, and his face did something she had not seen it do in 7 years of living alongside him. It became uncertain. When Dara finished, the silence lasted longer than any of the silences before it. Then Grant said, "Marcus Webb." Evelyn looked at him. "My head of corporate intelligence, the person in that communication log." Grant's voice had gone flat. Flat and careful, the voice of a man who is very angry and has decided that the anger is less useful than the clarity right now. Victor Rainsford approached him 4 years ago. I know this because Webb told me about it at the time. He said a private security consultant had reached out about a potential information sharing arrangement. Grant paused. He said he declined. He didn't decline, Dara said. I'm understanding that now. Webb has been Victor's contact inside your company for 4 years, Evelyn said. The transactions I noticed during the marriage, 3 of them, over 2 years, those were Victor's funds, moving through your accounts. Your company was a conduit. Grant looked at her. You noticed them. I noticed irregularities. I didn't know what they were. You wrote them down. Yes. Why? She held his gaze. Because I was a contract lawyer before I was your wife, and I never managed to fully stop. Something moved across his face. She couldn't name it precisely. Something between acknowledgement and a specific personal discomfort that had more self-awareness in it than she'd given him credit for. The notes, he said. Victor's people have them now. Yes, and they're going to use them to make it look like you were complicit in financial activity tied to my company, which they can use to freeze your inheritance claim. He said it flatly. Not a question. Doing the arithmetic in real time and doing it accurately. Yes, she said. Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Lucian. What do you need from me? What they needed was access. Specifically, access to 4 years of internal financial records from the Holloway Group. The original records, not the versions that had been filtered through Webb. If they could pull the original transaction data and trace it back through the routing, they could establish that the funds were not Holloway Group funds, that they were external, that they'd been laundered through the company's accounts without Grant's knowledge or authorization. That would transform the narrative. Instead of Evelyn being complicit in Grant's financial decisions, Grant would be the victim of a long-running infiltration, and Evelyn's notes would become evidence of early detection rather than participation. It was a viable counter case. It required the records. Grant called his CFO at 9:47 in the evening and instructed her to pull everything. His CFO, a woman named Tran, who had clearly been sitting awake waiting for something to happen, said it would take 3 hours minimum. Grant said, "Make it 2." While they waited, the ship's atmosphere tightened. Reyes came in at 10:15 with an update on the 3rd location, the commercial building. Victor wasn't there. One of his secondary contacts had been there, had left in a vehicle 20 minutes before Reyes's team arrived, and the building's internal surveillance had been wiped. Lucian absorbed this without visible reaction. The muscle in his jaw was working. His hands were flat on the table. Evelyn had been watching him long enough now to read the difference between his stillness when he was in control and his stillness when he was managing the feeling of not being in control, and this was the second kind. He's going for the 3rd backup, Dara said. Her voice was steady, but her fingers were tight around the tablet. If he knows I have a physical copy, does he know where it is? Evelyn asked. I don't think so. I've been careful. But if Webb has had access to your communications... Dara looked at her tablet. Her face went very still. I need to make a call, she said. She stood up and left the room quickly. Evelyn watched her go. She looked at Lucian. The physical backup, she said quietly. If Victor gets to it before we file. He won't. How do you know? Because Dara is the most careful person I have ever employed, and she would not have stored something that important somewhere it could be easily found. Victor has been inside your organization for 20 years. He knows how your people think. Lucian looked at her. I know, he said. That's what I'm dealing with right now. Grant, across the table, said nothing. He was watching them with the expression of a man who is trying to map a world he had not known existed until 3 hours ago. Dara came back at 10:31. She sat down. She placed both palms flat on the table in a gesture that Evelyn recognized as someone using physical sensation to stay focused. The backup is secure, Dara said. I moved it 2 days ago when I found the memo. It's in a location I haven't told anyone. Not Lucian, not anyone on the ship. She paused. But I need to go get it, tonight, before Victor finds a way to identify it. Take 2 of my people, Lucian said. If I take your people, they can be tracked. I need to do this alone or with someone Victor's network doesn't know. Evelyn looked at Dara. Dara looked back at her. I'll go. Go, Evelyn said. Absolutely not, Lucian said. I'm not asking. She kept her voice level. Dara is right. Anyone from your organization is a liability. Victor has had 20 years to map your people. He doesn't know me, or he didn't 3 days ago. She paused. And I need to not be sitting in this room waiting for things to happen to me. I have done that for 7 years, and I am finished with it. The room held its breath. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. She looked back with the same steadiness she'd been holding since the corridor, since the operations room, since the moment she had read Patricia's name on Dara's tablet and understood that the world was significantly larger and darker than she'd been allowed to see. You come back, he said. I intend to, she said. They left at 11. Dara drove, a nondescript vehicle from the harbor's rental pool, nothing connected to the ship. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and watched the city move past the windows. Where are we going? She asked. Law library at Hartwell University. I have a faculty access card. I did contract work for their legal department 2 years ago. The archive room has physical lockers. Very old system. No digital access log. Smart. I was a nervous law student once. We learned to be paranoid early. Evelyn almost smiled at that. Almost. They drove without speaking for a while. The city at 11 p.m. was a different city from the one she'd walked through in the rain 4 days ago. Or maybe she was a different person, and the city was the same. She watched it and thought about what had been done to her life, and tried to locate the correct feeling about it, and found that the feelings were too numerous and too large to fit in any one emotion, so she set them aside and focused on the street ahead. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Different from the previous ones. She answered. Silence for a moment, then, You should have stayed invisible. The voice was Victor's. She kept her own voice completely flat. How did you get this number? The same way I get most things. Patience. A pause. I want you to understand something, Evelyn. This is not personal. It was never personal. Your parents were... He paused again. They were collateral to something larger than you understand, and you were always going to be managed. The only question was by whom, and you decided it should be you. Someone was going to. At least I kept you alive. You kept me locked in a marriage for 7 years. I kept you breathing. His voice was still warm, still composed. The voice of a man who had told himself a story about his own actions for so long that the story had become the truth. This inheritance claim is not going to succeed. You can fight it, or you can walk away. If you walk away, you go back to whatever your new life is going to be, and no one troubles you further. And if I fight it, then you lose. And the losing will be public and humiliating, and it will involve your own words, in your own handwriting, and no one will believe that the woman who wrote those notes was merely an observant housewife. Dara was watching the rearview mirror. Her eyes flicked to Evelyn. Victor, Evelyn said. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Just once. A pause. Ask. Did you have anything to do with Claire's death? The silence lasted 6 seconds. It was the longest he had paused for any question. No, he said. She didn't know if she believed him. She filed the pause. She filed the quality of the no, not the automatic denial, not the practiced warmth, something different, something that might have been actual. Then I'll fight it, she said, and hung up. Dara exhaled. He's tracking your phone. Yes. Evelyn took the phone and removed the SIM card with the efficient movements of a woman who had been thinking about this since she answered the call. How much further? 6 minutes. Then we have 6 minutes before he knows we've gone dark. Dara pressed the accelerator. The law library was dark and silent, the way libraries are at midnight, the particular silence of buildings that spend their days full of people and their nights reclaiming the quiet. Dara's faculty card got them through the side entrance. They moved quickly through dim corridors, past shelves that went up to the ceiling, past carrels with their abandoned coffee cups and forgotten highlighters. The archive room was in the basement. Dara entered a combination on a physical lock, and they went in. The locker was the third from the left, bottom row. Dara knelt and opened it and removed a sealed envelope, thick, rigid, the kind that contained multiple document sleeves. She held it for a moment. Everything we need to prove Victor's connection to the Holloway transactions, she said. The memo, the communication logs, the financial trace. 2 full copies. Evelyn took 1 copy. Separate routes back? Yes. If something happens to either of us, the other one gets there. Dara stood. I know. They looked at each other for a moment in the dim archive room. 2 women who had met 4 hours ago and were now standing in a basement holding the thing that would determine whether an inheritance was claimed or buried. Thank you, Evelyn said, for the message. For the 3 weeks of work you did before I even arrived. Dara shook her head. I did it because it was right, not as a favor. I know, Evelyn said. That's why I'm thanking you. They separated at the library's side entrance, Dara going left toward the faculty parking lot, Evelyn going right toward the street where she would call an unconnected car service she'd never used before from the number on a business card Reyes had pressed into her hand before she left the ship. The night was cold. She walked quickly. The envelope was inside her coat, against her chest, her arm pressed against it. She made it half a block before the black car appeared. It came from the side street to her left, slow and deliberate, the way vehicles move when they are not lost and are not in a hurry and know exactly where the person they are looking for is going to be. It stopped parallel to her on the street. The window came down. She stopped walking. The man in the passenger seat was not Victor. She didn't recognize him. He was younger than she expected, with the specific blankness of face that people cultivate when they want to be forgotten afterward. He looked at her the way people look at a problem they've been sent to solve. Ms. Marlowe, he said, Mr. Rainsford would like the envelope. She looked at him. She looked at the car. There was a driver she couldn't fully see, and at least one more person in the back seat. She was on a street a quarter mile from the library with no phone SIM card and a document that would determine everything in the next 11 days. Tell Mr. Rainsford, she said, that he should have come himself. She turned and walked back the way she'd come, fast, not running yet. And behind her she heard the car door open, heard footsteps on the pavement, heard the driver's side door, and then she was running, the envelope flat against her ribs, her heart going hard against her sternum, her breath coming in sharp pulls of cold air as she cut left off the sidewalk into the narrow gap between 2 buildings. Because she had walked this neighborhood 14 times in her marriage, and she knew that gap led to a service alley that ran the length of the block, and she went through it at full speed with footsteps behind her, and the alley was dark and cold and smelled of the city, and she did not stop. She came out the other end of the alley onto a lit street, and there was a couple on the sidewalk with a dog, and she went straight to them with her hand out and said, I need your phone, please. I need your phone, right now. And something in her face or her voice communicated enough that the woman handed her phone over without a word. She called the one number she'd memorized. Lucian answered on the first ring. They found me, she said. Her breath was ragged. She was pressing herself into the building's doorway, watching the alley exit. 43 Belmore Street, alley exit by the laundromat. I have the documents. I need 3 minutes, Lucian said. His voice was absolutely controlled. Do not move from where you are. There are at least 3 of them. Evelyn, 3 minutes. She pressed the phone against her chest and pressed her back against the brick and breathed. Her legs were burning. The envelope was still against her ribs, still intact, still everything. The couple with the dog had moved away quickly, and she didn't blame them. At the end of the alley, she saw a figure appear. Pause. Look in both directions. She didn't move. She thought about the room where Lucian had first sat across from her and said, It begins before either of us was old enough to understand what it meant. She thought about the photograph of the little girl with the longer hair in front of a house that burned. She thought about 7 years of being invisible, and she thought about a leaking roof and birthday cards, and a woman who had answered on the second ring. The figure in the alley moved toward the lit street. She pressed herself flatter. Headlights, from her left, a vehicle coming fast. It stopped at the curb and the door was open before it fully stopped, and Reyes was out of it moving toward her, and she did not need to be told twice. She was already moving, already at the door, already inside, the door slamming as the vehicle accelerated, and she turned to see Reyes in the back seat with her, and she pressed the envelope harder against her chest with both arms and let herself breathe. "Dara," she said. "Secure," Reyes said. "She's back." "The men who came for me, we know. We're tracking the vehicle." He paused. Victor sent 3 people for the documents and pulled 2 others away from the commercial building location simultaneously. She registered that. He split his resources. "Yes, the building location. We got there before the 2 he pulled away could clear it." He reached into the jacket and withdrew a small USB drive. His communication files. Physical backup he kept at the building location. He didn't know we'd get there before he could clean it out. She stared at the drive. "Is that 4 years of outgoing communications," Reyes said. "Victor's personal encryption. Our tech people are working on it now." She took the drive from him and held it alongside the envelope from the archive locker and sat in the moving vehicle with both hands full and tried to understand the specific shape of what they now had against what Victor was still holding. Her private notes in his hands. Her name attached to financial activity she'd witnessed but never understood. His 4 years of communications now in theirs. And 11 days until the oversight panel convened. The vehicle crossed back toward the harbor. She could see the lights of the waterfront ahead, and beyond them the black hull of the ship. And she thought about standing on the deck that morning, with the wind coming off the water, and telling herself she was probably wrong about Victor. She had not been wrong. She pressed her back against the seat and closed her eyes for exactly 10 seconds. Behind her eyelids, the facts arranged themselves in the way. Facts arrange themselves when a lawyer has lived with them long enough. The shape of the case, the weight of each piece, what was provable and what wasn't yet, what needed 11 days and what needed tonight. When she opened her eyes, the ship was close. She looked at Reyes. "I need to be in the operations room in 10 minutes. I need Lucian, I need Dara, I need your tech people, and I need Grant's CFO on a secure call." "Grant's still on the ship," Reyes said. That surprised her. "He stayed?" "He said he wanted to finish what he started." She looked out the window at the approaching harbor, at the black and gold ship that shouldn't have been real, that had appeared out of morning fog 4 days ago, and dismantled everything she thought she knew about the shape of her own life. Grant had stayed. Victor had sent 3 people into the night after a single envelope. The math of who was afraid of what was becoming very clear. "When we get back," she said to Reyes, "seal the ship, nothing in or out, and I need someone to find where Victor is right now, not tomorrow, not in an hour. We're working on it. Work faster." The vehicle pulled to the dock. "Because in 11 days I am walking into that oversight panel with everything we have, and I need Victor either in a room where he can't do anything or in a position where doing anything makes his own case for us." She got out of the vehicle. The dock was cold and lit, and the ship was right there, massive and real. And Lucian was at the top of the gangway watching her come up with an expression she didn't have a name for yet. Not relief, not exactly. Something more complicated than relief. Something that had several years of looking for someone in it. She reached the top of the gangway and stopped in front of him. "I have the documents," she said. "I have Reyes's drive. I have 11 days. She paused. "And I have something I didn't have 6 hours ago." "What's that?" he said. "I'm done being managed," she said. She walked past him into the ship and did not look back, and the harbor moved behind her, and the night was very cold and very clear, and somewhere in the city, Victor Rainsford was calculating his next move. And for the first time in 37 years, the woman he had spent decades arranging and containing and keeping small was calculating hers right back, with everything she needed in her hands and nothing left to lose that she hadn't already decided to stop protecting. The operations room at 2 in the morning had the specific atmosphere of a place where people have been working past the point where the body cooperates. Coffee cups abandoned at various stages of consumption, jackets over chairbacks, the particular stillness of individuals running on decision-making rather than energy. Evelyn had not slept. She was not going to sleep. She sat at the central table with Grant's CFO on a secure video call, a precise woman named Helen Tran, who had clearly decided somewhere around midnight that the most useful thing she could do was stop being shocked and start being useful. Beside Evelyn, Dara had the physical documents spread in sequence. Reyes's tech specialist, a young man named Cho, who spoke in half sentences and thought in full systems, had cracked the first layer of Victor's encrypted communications drive by 1:15 and was working through the second layer with the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly what was at stake and found the technical problem genuinely interesting regardless. Lucian moved around the edges of the room. He did not sit. She had stopped expecting him to. Grant sat across from her. He had removed his jacket somewhere in the last 2 hours, and his shirt was wrinkled at the sleeves, and he looked, for the first time in the 11 years she had known him, like a man who understood that he was not the most important person in the room and had made peace with it. The picture that assembled itself across the table over those hours was not simple. It was the opposite of simple. It was the kind of picture that requires multiple people looking at it from different angles before the whole shape becomes visible. And even then, certain parts of it were ugly in ways that implicated everyone present to varying degrees. Victor Rainsford had been running a parallel operation inside Lucian's organization for 14 years. Not 20, 14. The first 6 years he had been, by every measurable indication, exactly what he presented himself as. A committed, effective strategist who built Lucian's enterprise from a fractured collection of regional interests into a coherent international organization. The turn happened in year 7, when Victor had first identified the dormant Marlowe-Varelli Inheritance Trust and understood, with the specific intelligence of a man who notices the value in things others have overlooked, what it represented. Not just money. Architecture. The Marlowe-Varelli Trust was structured in a way that gave its holder controlling interest in a series of legitimate business entities that underpinned significant portions of Lucian's operation. If the inheritance were claimed by the rightful heir, it would restructure the power balance of the entire organization. Victor, who had spent 6 years building himself into an indispensable position, would become significantly less indispensable. He had not arranged Evelyn's marriage out of protective instinct. He had arranged it to keep the heir contained, quiet, and legally encumbered. A married woman with no independent financial standing and no knowledge of what she was owed was not a woman who could walk into an oversight panel and claim an inheritance. He had kept her invisible because her visibility threatened him. Cho read sections of the decrypted communications aloud, flatly, without editorial comment, and the room absorbed each piece with the quiet of people who are past the point of being surprised and are now simply building. Grant, listening, said very little. At one point, when Cho read a communication between Victor and Webb that referenced the specific property transactions Evelyn had noted in her private document, Grant put both hands flat on the table and looked at them for a long time. When he looked up, he said, "I want Marcus Webb arrested." "That's not our jurisdiction," Reyes said. "It will be someone's." "Yes," Lucian said from the edge of the room. "It will be." Evelyn looked at Grant. He looked back at her. In his eyes, there was something that was not quite an apology. Grant Holloway was not structurally capable of the straightforward apology. She had always known that. But something adjacent to it. Something that he acknowledged, without the full vocabulary of contrition, that he understood now what had been in his house for 7 years and what he had done with it. She didn't give him the absolution he wasn't quite asking for. But she didn't look away either. "The motion your lawyers filed," she said, "to void the divorce. I'll have it withdrawn by morning," he said. "I need it withdrawn before 6 a.m. I'll call them now." He stood and moved to the corner of the room with his phone, and she watched him make the call and thought about all the ways a person's life could be shaped by the decisions of people who never asked them anything, and then she turned back to the table because there was still work to do. Victor surfaced at 4:17 in the morning, not in person, through a lawyer, a man named Christoph Adler, Zurich-based, who placed a call to Lucian's legal team with a proposal. The proposal was clean in the way that only proposals from cornered men trying to look uncornered can be clean. Victor was willing to provide documentation supporting the legitimacy of the Marlowe-Varelli inheritance claim in exchange for immunity from any civil or criminal proceedings arising from his activities within the organization. Lucian read the proposal summary and handed it to Evelyn without comment. She read it. She set it down. He thinks we need him, she said. He built the case for 14 years. He knows where certain documents are that we don't. Do we need them? Lucian looked at Cho. Cho looked up from his screen. The communications drive has 90% of what we'd need for full documentation. The remaining 10% involves 3 property records that were sealed under a Brussels administrative process in 2011. Victor would have access to the unsealing mechanism. How long without him? Evelyn asked. To unseal through legitimate channels? 4 to 6 weeks. And the oversight panel is in 11 days. Yes. She looked at Lucian. The panel doesn't need the sealed property records to validate the inheritance claim. They need the bloodline confirmation, the original trust documentation, and a clear chain of title. We have all of that. Victor's lawyer will argue the sealed records contain counter-evidence. They don't, Dara said. She had been quiet for the last 20 minutes, working through a document with a precision that Evelyn had come to recognize as her at her most focused. I know what's in those records. Victor told me 3 years ago when I was helping him catalog the historical files. He described them as supplementary property surveys. I was using the sealed status as leverage, implying they contain something damaging when they don't. Evelyn looked at her. You're certain? He was very specific. He was also, at the time, not aware that I would ever be in a position where that specificity mattered. Evelyn turned back to the proposal. She read it one more time. Then she folded it and set it at the far edge of the table. We decline, she said. Lucian looked at her. We decline, she said again, steadily. Victor gets nothing from us. Not immunity, not negotiation, not the dignity of a deal. We file in 11 days with what we have. If the sealed records become an issue with the panel, we address it then. She paused. And we forward everything on the communications drive to the relevant legal authorities in every jurisdiction where his activities touch down. That's 4 countries, Reyes said. Then 4 countries, she said. He kept me in a box for 7 years and called it protection. He killed my parents' legacy and called it strategy. He is not getting a negotiated exit. The room was quiet. Lucian said, All right. She looked at him. You're not going to argue? No. You built 20 years of your operation with him. Yes. His voice was absolutely level. I know what I built, and I know what it was built on. I'm not arguing. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and turned back to the table. Then we have 9 hours until the lawyers open, she said. Let's use them. Victor did not disappear gracefully. Cornered men rarely do. At 7 in the morning, as Caldwell Harbor came back to daylight and the city resumed its ordinary machinery, Victor's lawyer released a statement to 3 financial news outlets. The statement was carefully worded. No direct accusations, nothing that could be cleanly litigated. But its implication was clear, that the inheritance claim being prepared by an individual connected to the Varelli organization was based on manipulated documentation, and that the claimant herself had a history of financial involvement with entities under investigation. Evelyn read the statement on Dara's tablet over coffee. She actually tasted this time. He's trying to poison the panel, she said. Yes, Dara said. Can he? The panel is formal. They're required to evaluate submitted documentation, not press statements. Dara set down her own cup. But 3 of the 5 panel members are appointed by an international oversight body that is sensitive to reputational concerns. If the statement gets significant pickup in the financial press before we file, how long before we file? We could file today. The documents are ready. Evelyn looked at her. Then we file today. There are still formatting requirements. How long? Dara looked at the documents, at the clock on the wall, at Evelyn. 4 hours. Then, in 4 hours, we file. She stood. And I need to make a call. She called Patricia from a ship landline because she no longer had a functioning mobile and because she wanted the call on a recorded line. She had thought about this for several hours. What to say? How to say it? How much to let herself feel about what had been done by a woman who had sent birthday cards for 11 years. She had not arrived at clean answers. She had arrived at the understanding that clean answers were not available and that the absence of them was something she would have to carry. Patricia answered on the 3rd ring. Evelyn. Her voice was careful. The careful of a person who has been waiting and has had time to prepare and has prepared badly. I know about, Evelyn said. I know about the money. I know that the files you sent me were sent from inside Grant's building, not your apartment. She paused. I need you to understand that I know all of it. I'm not calling to ask you to confirm it. Silence. Then why are you calling? Patricia's voice had changed. The careful was gone. What was underneath it was tired, genuinely, profoundly tired, in the way of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has been waiting, perhaps, for the moment when they didn't have to hold it anymore. I'm calling because I want to know one thing that isn't in any document. Evelyn's hand was tight on the receiver. She made herself loosen it. Did you know, when we had lunch 3 days ago, that they were going to use my files against me? The silence was longer this time, long enough that the quality of it became its own answer. Yes, Patricia said. The word landed the way words land when you already knew them, and hearing them said aloud changes nothing about what you know, and everything about how it sits in your body. Why? Evelyn asked. Webb approached me 14 months ago. Patricia's voice was flat now, the flatness of someone past performance. He had documentation, real documentation, of something I did 12 years ago, a case I mishandled, a client I failed badly. She stopped. If it had come out, I would have lost my license, my career, everything. So you agreed to watch me. I agreed to maintain contact, to report back if you ever surfaced, became visible. A breath. When you called me from the hotel, I called Webb, and then I went to lunch with you, and I looked at you across the table, and Another breath. I told Webb I was out that afternoon. I told him I was done. But you sent the files. He had remote access to my drive. He pulled them without me. I didn't know until it was done. Evelyn stood in the small communications room with the receiver pressed against her ear and looked at the wall and tried to locate the truth in what she was hearing. The specific difficulty of it was this. She believed Patricia. She believed her in the way you believe someone who is confessing to the worst version of themselves rather than the best, in the way confession is distinguished from performance by the things it doesn't omit. It didn't make it smaller. It didn't make the lunch not hurt, the birthday cards not curl at the edges, the second ring not ring. I'm going to have to give your name to the relevant authorities, Evelyn said. Everything I know, I can't protect you from that. I know, Patricia said, and I can't. She stopped. She started again. I don't have anything left to say to you beyond that. I know, Patricia said again. She hung up. She stood in the room for a moment with her hand on the receiver that she'd set back in its cradle. Then she walked out into the corridor and went to find Dara and told her they were filing in 4 hours and kept moving. They filed at 1:17 in the afternoon. It was not dramatic. The actual filing was a digital submission with a physical copy delivered by courier to the oversight body's regional office, 12 blocks from the harbor, a building that looked like what it was, which was a place where significant decisions were made in ordinary-looking rooms. Dara handled the submission. Lucian's lead attorney of record, a woman named Sewell, who had flown in on 6 hours' notice from London and had been working without apparent fatigue since her arrival, stood with her. Evelyn stood on the deck of the ship and watched the harbor and waited. She heard later that Victor's lawyer had attempted to file an injunction blocking the submission at 1:09, 8 minutes before the filing went through. The injunction was based on the press statement argument. That documentation was in dispute, and the panel should withhold acceptance pending independent review. The regional office had declined. The filing criteria were met. The documentation was in order. They accepted it. When Sewell called to confirm, Evelyn was still on the deck. Lucian was standing 10 feet away. She heard the call, and she said thank you, and she ended it, and she stood with her phone in her hand and looked at the water. Lucian came to stand beside her at the rail. They stood there for a moment without speaking, which had become, over these days, one of the more honest things between them. The capacity to be in the same place without filling it with words. It's not over, she said. The panel still convenes. Victor will challenge it. Yes. And the legal process is going to take months. Yes. And there are 4 countries with jurisdictional claims on his activities, which means 4 separate proceedings, which means years of Evelyn. He said her name the way he'd said it the first night, like it was the specific name of the specific person in front of him, and not a sound for getting attention. I know. All of that is true. And it's going to be hard and it's going to be long, and there's no version of this that's clean. She looked at him. I'm not looking for clean. I know. He looked at the water. That's one of the things He stopped. Something moved in his jaw. I spent a long time looking for you, years of it. And there were many versions of what I imagined you might have become, depending on what had happened to you, depending on what the years had done. He paused. None of them were you. She held still. The wind was cold off the harbor, and her coat was not quite sufficient for it, but she didn't move. Is that a complaint? She asked. No, he said. The word was very quiet. It's the opposite of a complaint. She looked back at the water. A cargo ship was moving out toward the open sea, slow and enormous, carrying whatever it carried in the great indifferent way of things that have somewhere to be. She watched it until it was smaller. I need you to understand something, she said. I am not going to be grateful for any of it. Not for being found, not for being brought here, not for the years of searching. I understand why it was done. I even understand in the specific way that understanding doesn't require forgiveness, what Victor thought he was doing. But I am not going to stand here and be grateful that my life has been returned to me because it was never yours to return. She looked at him. It was always mine. He looked back at her. His face had the expression of someone receiving something directly that they had been circling around for a long time. Yes, he said. It was. Good, she said. As long as we're clear. We're clear. Something changed in his eyes. Something old in them moved. Are you going to leave? She looked at him. Is that what you're asking me? I'm asking what you want to do. When the filing is done, when the process is running, when there's no immediate fire to put out. He held her gaze. I'm asking what Evelyn Marlowe wants. Not what makes sense strategically. Not what protects the claim. What you want. She had not been asked that question in a very long time. She was aware that she had not been asked it in a long time. Aware of the specific quality of the absence as the question landed. The way you become aware of a sound only when it stops. She took her time answering. The harbor moved. The cargo ship was small now. I want to go through the trust documentation, all of it. I want to understand exactly what was built and what was damaged and what's still intact. She looked at the water. I want to rebuild the legitimate side of it, the business entities, the infrastructure. That's what my parents built. Not the power, not the protection, the actual work. The thing that employed people and moved goods and built roads in places that needed roads. She paused. I want that back. Not as an inheritance, as a continuation. Lucian was quiet for a moment. That's going to require a very good legal team. I have one. It's going to require people who understand how the organization runs. I'm learning. It's going to take years. I'm 41, she said. I have years. I was looking at her with an expression she had been trying to name for 5 days and had not yet named. She was not certain it had a name. It was the expression of a man who has been waiting for a particular thing without knowing precisely what he was waiting for, and has just watched it walk out of a morning fog and stand in front of him at a harbor rail. Then stay, he said. It was the simplest thing he'd said to her. She looked at him for a long moment, at the face that had weathered things, at the eyes that had spent too many years being the thing people were afraid of and had, somewhere in there, stopped expecting to be anything else. I'll stay, she said. But I want an office. He almost laughed. It was not quite a laugh. It was the thing that happens just before a laugh in a person who has forgotten how. You can have an office. A real one, not a cabin. A real one. And I'm not reporting to Victor's replacement. Victor doesn't have a replacement yet. He will. When he does, I want that arrangement in writing. You're negotiating. I'm a contract lawyer, she said. I never stopped. The weeks that followed were not quiet. There is a specific myth about resolution, that it comes with stillness, with a sense of clean arrival. It doesn't. It comes with paperwork and conference calls and 4 jurisdictions, and a panel that convened on a Tuesday and deliberated for 9 days, and then upheld the claim on a Wednesday afternoon while Evelyn was eating a sandwich she'd forgotten was in her hand. Sewell called to tell her. She put the sandwich down. She sat with the information for a moment. She said, "Thank you." She hung up. Then she went back to the document she'd been reviewing and finished the paragraph she'd been in the middle of, because there was still work to do, and the work didn't pause for the emotional logic of moments. Victor's proceedings moved through 4 countries at the specific pace of international legal processes, which is to say, slowly and with the grinding thoroughness of institutions that have seen men like Victor before and are not impressed by their complexity. Webb was arrested on a Thursday morning at his home. He cooperated. The cooperation, which his lawyer had clearly advised him toward, implicated 3 additional individuals across 2 of the 4 jurisdictions and significantly accelerated the timeline for at least one of the proceedings. Patricia Holt voluntarily surrendered her license pending investigation. She sent Evelyn one message, through a mutual contact, that said only, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't do anything." Evelyn read it and did not respond. She kept the message in a separate folder and did not delete it and did not read it again, which was the most honest thing she could do. Grant withdrew his legal motions. He did this quietly, without announcement, which was perhaps the most dignity he had managed across the entire situation. He restructured his corporate intelligence function entirely, at some cost and considerable disruption, and he did it without making public statements about why. She heard about it from Sewell, who heard about it from someone at the oversight body. She registered it. She moved on. The thing with Grant that was most difficult to carry was not his arrogance during the marriage, not the papers signed with a smirk, not even "you were never the woman I needed" spoken with that effortless certainty. It was the understanding that he had been, in his own way, managed, that the marriage which had contained her had also, in different ways, contained him, that Victor had used them both as structural elements in something neither of them had consented to. She could not forgive him for what he'd done with the years of their marriage, but she could hold the complexity of knowing that the origin of it was not purely his, that the situation was not as simple as one bad man making one bad choice. Complexity, she was learning, was not the enemy of accountability. You could hold both. It was harder, but it was more accurate, and accuracy was something she had decided to insist on. She found Victor once, in the months that followed. Not in person, in a document. Cho, working through the later layers of the decrypted communications drive, found a file that had been structured to look like routine administrative correspondence and was not. It was a record, organized, dated, meticulously maintained, of every step Victor had taken over 14 years to monitor and manage the heir. It included Clara, her health records, the correspondence with her doctors in the months before the stroke that killed her at 61. The correspondence didn't prove what she feared. Clara's death appeared genuinely to have been natural. The record showed Victor monitoring, checking, calculating, but not intervening. She didn't know if that meant he had stopped short of the final step or had simply not needed to take it. She sat with that ambiguity for 3 days, and then she put the file away in the same folder as Patricia's message, and she chose to spend the next decade building rather than determining the precise dimensions of what had been destroyed. It was not peace, it was a decision. Sometimes that's what's available. 6 months after the filing, Evelyn moved into an office. It was on the 2nd floor of a building on the waterfront that the Marlowe Varelli Trust owned outright, a solid building, older, with windows that looked out over the harbor and the water beyond. She furnished it with a desk and 2 chairs and a set of legal shelves and a coffee maker that she operated herself. She had staff, eventually. She hired them with the specific attention of a woman who had spent 7 years being judged for things that had nothing to do with her capability. She worked long days and she ate lunch at her desk, and she read every document herself before she signed anything. And the work was not glamorous and it was not simple, and it was exactly what she had said she wanted. Standing at the harbor rail with the wind coming off the water, a continuation. The thing that employed people and moved things and built in places that needed building. The legitimate enterprises recovered more quickly than the legal team had projected. Not spectacularly. Not in the way of stories where things are reclaimed in triumph and restored to their former glory in a montage of meaningful moments. Slowly. With setbacks. With 2 entities that had been too compromised to salvage. With 1 regional operation that had to be rebuilt from almost nothing. She was present for all of it. Lucian remained. That was the thing that surprised her most. Not that he stayed, but what staying looked like. He was not in her office every day. He was not in her orbit constantly, was not repositioned around her the way powerful men sometimes reposition themselves around women they are trying to claim. He had his own work, his own operation, his own reckoning with what 14 years of Victor had done to the architecture he'd built. He dealt with it with the same controlled, unglamorous persistence with which she was dealing with hers. They had dinner sometimes, on the ship, or in the city, or occasionally in a restaurant where no one paid them particular attention. The conversations were not romantic in the way of the word's soft associations. They were the conversations of two people with complicated histories trying to build something honest out of the complicated present, which is to say they were often difficult and occasionally funny, and sometimes went to places that cost something to go to, and that they went anyway because they had both decided that managed distance was a thing they were finished with. One evening, 5 months after the filing, they were on the ship's deck in the late hour of a summer night. The harbor was warm and lit, and the water was almost still. She had a glass of something she wasn't drinking much of, and he was leaning on the rail with his arms crossed, and they had been talking for a long time about something she couldn't remember afterward. There was a pause. Not an uncomfortable one. "My father," she said. "What was his name?" Lucian looked at her. "You don't know?" Clara called him a family name, a shortened version. I never knew his full name. He was quiet for a moment. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Marlowe." He signed his letters D.E. Marlowe. The E was for Edward, his grandfather's name. She said it to herself quietly. Daniel Edward Marlowe. The name of a man who had reached a hand toward a 17-year-old boy in a bad situation because he believed people were worth more than their worst circumstances. "And my mother?" "Rena, short for Renata." He paused. "She was the one who understood the business side, the architecture of it. Your father had the vision, but she built the systems. She absorbed that. So the part of me that kept notes on financial irregularities, probably her." She looked at the water, at the lights reflecting in it, broken up by the small movements of the surface. She thought about a woman named Renata, who built systems, and a man named Daniel, who believed in people, and a small girl in a photograph standing in front of a house that would burn, and Clara with her leaking roof and her unasked-for silence, and 7 years of invisible and the rain on a sidewalk outside a building with gold letters, and a ship appearing out of the fog of an early morning like something that shouldn't be real. She thought about all the ways a life could be shaped without a person's knowledge, and all the ways it could be reclaimed with their full, deliberate attention. "I would have liked to know them," she said. "Yes," Lucian said. "They would have liked to know you." She believed him. That was the thing. She had become, over these months, a person who could believe true things without needing them to be more than true, without needing them to fix the absence or fill the shape of what was missing. They were true, and the loss was real, and both of those things lived in the same place without canceling each other out. She finished the thing she wasn't drinking and set the glass on the rail and straightened. The harbor was still. The city hummed behind them at the low, constant frequency of a city at night. "I have an 8 o'clock tomorrow," she said. "You always have an 8 o'clock. The Lisbon property review. I need to be sharp." He looked at her. The expression she had never quite named was there again, quieter now, settled into something that had more permanence in it than the first time she'd seen it. "Go sleep," he said. She pushed off the rail. She was almost to the door when she stopped. Not for drama. There was no drama in it, just a thought that had arrived and needed to be said before she went inside. "I spent 7 years being someone nobody watched," she said, not looking back. "I used to think that was what I was, that being overlooked was something inside me rather than something done to me." She paused. "I know the difference now." She heard him breathe, heard the small sound of the water against the hull. "I know," he said quietly. She went inside. The corridor was warm and lit and familiar in the way of places that have become yours through use rather than assignment. Her office was 1 floor up. Her desk was exactly as she'd left it, which was the way she liked it. The current files on the left, the completed files on the right, the things requiring her attention positioned where she would see them first in the morning. She walked past her office without stopping. She kept going to the cabin she'd made her own. In the months since the night she'd arrived with 1 suitcase and a marriage that was already over and a history she hadn't known she carried. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. Not collapsed, just sitting. The particular sitting of a person at the end of a day that has required a lot. Her hands were in her lap. They were steady. She had been, she supposed, so many different versions of the same woman. The woman with the briefcase and the contracts. The woman who kept a house and corrected insurance filings and wrote notes in private that no one was supposed to read. The woman who walked out into the rain with a single suitcase and nowhere to be. The woman who stood in a harbor at 6 in the morning and watched a ship come out of the fog. She was all of those women still. She had not replaced them with something more convenient. She had added to them, which is how it actually works. Not the shedding of what was, but the expansion of what is possible. She lay back. The ceiling of the cabin was exactly where it always was. She looked at it for a moment. Outside, the harbor moved. The city made its sounds. Somewhere across the water, beyond the lights, the open ocean was doing what it always did, neither waiting nor impatient, simply going on. She closed her eyes. She slept.